regional conference. However, they incorrectly told me it was the fourth regional conference of the Caribbean. It is not, ladies and gentlemen. It is only the third in the regional conferences of Caribbean countries, because we are not, repeat, not in the Caribbean. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to St. George's. I understand you have a number of interesting pieces of information that will be entrusted with your brain today. Ladies and gentlemen, please pay attention, because there may be a test on. It gives me great pleasure now, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce to you some very important folks here in Bermuda. Ladies and gentlemen, none other than the Governor of Bermuda, His Excellency, Mr. John Rankin. And ladies and gentlemen, representing the government of Bermuda, ladies and gentlemen, we have here today Mr. Diego Remain, JPMP, Minister of Education. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand that Mr. White here organized all of you lot to come earlier than he told me. However, having said that, are you going to make a speech, sir?
There are too many speeches.
Too many speeches. Your Excellency, I invite you to the microphone so that perhaps you don't have to be a town crier, and maybe you would like to say a few words.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Your Royal Highness, Minister of Education, Dame Fiona Reynolds, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here and to welcome each and every one of you for this International Conference of National Trusts. I understand that your first international conference was convened in 1978 in Scotland, which happens to be my home country. So I feel some personal connection with your history, while of course also being very glad that you're now gathering here in Bermuda, where I have the honour to serve as Governor. But despite yesterday, I think you will find that the weather here is rather better than in Scotland. You will have already found, you have already seen for yourselves what a beautiful island this is. And as patron of the Bermuda National Trust, I'm strongly supportive of its work in conserving Bermuda's natural beauty, its marshlands, its islands, its nature reserves, its wetlands. And I'm equally proud of its work in preserving the man-made beauty on this island, including this wonderful UNESCO World Heritage Site that is St. George's. But I'm equally supportive of what I understand to be your aims at this international conference. The theme of Arms Wide Open, strategies for engaging with diverse communities, seems to me to be an important one. It's through engagement with the whole community in all its ethnic, cultural, religious, linguistic, religious, gender, age diversity that the work of National Trust can be best understood in the communities in which they operate. And I think even more importantly, it's through that sort of broad engagement that support for work of National Trusts can best be gained. And I particularly welcome the work of trusts worldwide in engaging young people in their work. It's a truism, but none the worse for that, to say that the young people of today are our hope for the future. And they understand much better, I fear, than my generation did at their age, the vital importance of tackling climate change and the threats posed by changing weather patterns, as we saw most recently by the cyclone that hit so badly Mozambique, Malawi and Zimbabwe. Young people also understand the need to promote sustainable development, and they understand that such matters cannot be left just to governments or just to governors alone, and that community-based volunteerism and action can help to change attitudes and deliver real results. So I thank you for your volunteerism in helping to spread and engage on that message. 2019 marks the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Bermuda National Trust Act, and it's 30 years since the last International Conference of National Trusts was held on this island. So now, 30 years later, I'm pleased that you've gathered here, again as delegates, representing more than 30, perhaps more than 35 countries across the world. I hope you have a thought-provoking and inspiring conference. The work you do is important. You have my support in achieving your goals. Thank you.
Good morning. Your Royal Highness Diana Ferris of Jordan, His Excellency Governor Rankin, and Mayor of St. George's, Cornell Francis, and honored guests, welcome. It is my great privilege to be here with you today for the opening of the 18th International Conference of National Trusts and the 4th Caribbean Conference of National Trusts and Preservation Societies. The theme of this conference this year is Arms Wide Open, Strategies for Engaging with Diverse Communities. This theme reinforces our collective responsibility to preserve the tangible and intangible heritage that all of the people who make up their communities, and of the importance of showing how preservation of the environment and open spaces is important to all of us. As Minister of Education, I am encouraged by the portion of this conference that is dedicated to the engagement and education of our young people, urging them to get from behind their computer screens and get into the open air to enjoy nature. Additionally, I welcome the plenary session, The Last Straw, Lessons Learned from Campaigns to Reduce the Use of Single-Use Plastic Items. In the 2018 speech from the throne, this government pledged to rid Bermuda of single-use plastics by 2022. This goal will be accomplished by introducing an educational campaign around recycling and reusable items while encouraging greater sensitivity to the ocean and its importance to our lives. I am confident that this plenary session will yield ideas that can be used to help our little island achieve our goal of educating the public on why single-use plastics must be eliminated from our island home. In closing, on behalf of the government of Bermuda, and by extension the people of Bermuda, I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you. Please accept my sincere gratitude to all that were involved in making this conference a reality. Welcome and thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're just going to be following the program if you all have it. So we're about to go into a video welcome, and then the speakers will just come on and in the order as in the program, and I won't get up every time and say what's going to happen next. Okay, thank you. Your Excellency, Minister of Education, and the town crier.
Hello to all of our friends at INTO in Bermuda. It's wonderful to see that all of you are gathered again for another ICNT, and this time in the wonderful island of Bermuda. And for me, it's really quite difficult to imagine that it's been 18 months that we hosted all of you in Gianya Regency in Bali. And I had wonderful experiences of that event, and I hope those of you who attended our ICNT also enjoyed the event. I understand Ari is going to be joining you in Bermuda, and I hope she's going to have a wonderful time with you. You know, BPPI, our organization, is a great supporter of INTO, We have the same values, and we try very hard to complement INTO's work, especially here in Indonesia. And we expect to continue our cooperation with all of you in the years to come. And hopefully I'll be able to attend the next ICNT wherever all of you decide it's going to be in 2 years' time. So I wish you all the best. I wish all success for all of you in Bermuda. To our friends at the Bermuda National Trust, I just wish you congratulations on being able to host this year's ICNT. Good luck to all of you, and Godspeed.
Good morning. Your Excellency, Minister, Your Royal Highness Princess Diana, Queen Ket, distinguished guests from all over the world. It is very moving to be here this morning as the chair of INTO and welcome you all to Bermuda. This is a sparkling day, isn't it, in every sense of the word, and I think we all feel very, very lucky and privileged to be here. We remember Bali 18 months ago, many of us. It's lovely, Harry, to see you here, but it's also lovely to hear Pak Hashim reminding us of that amazing conference. But we know Bali has had its troubles with the earthquake and other volcanic activities since then. So we send love and very, very best wishes to everybody in Bali, and thank you so much for that wonderful experience 18 months ago. We're also anticipating going to Belgium in 2 years' time. I think there must be something about countries beginning with B that we are irresistibly attracted to. So if anyone comes from a country beginning with B, you know, you're next in line. But maybe we'll just have a bit of diversity after that. But anyway, it's wonderful to see how the wheel turns. This is the 18th conference. It's actually my 9th, so I'm feeling not like an old-timer, because there are definitely people here who've been to more than me, but it just feels and reinforces to me the sense of family, that we meet all over the world, we share stories, we share experiences. Something indescribably special about the movement that we're all privileged to be part of. We've just heard it's the 4th Caribbean conference, but not the 4th, actually, so it's clearly a very special time to be 30 years after a previous conference here in Bermuda, and I want to add my very warm thanks to everybody involved in the Bermuda National Trust who's been working so hard to lay this conference on. So can we give them all a round of applause, please? I also bring the warm wishes of His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. We so nearly got him. He's not that far away, as most of you will know, but his itinerary is crazy, and it just wasn't possible. But he does send his very warm wishes, and he is visiting the Cayman Islands National Trust. So we have a sense, indeed, that he is with us in spirit, even though he can't be with us in person. But he's a very loyal and passionate supporter of the National Trust movement, and we know that the Cayman Islands National Trust will be giving him a fabulous experience. So I'm sure that we should send our very good wishes back to him, if I may, on your behalf. The conference theme is very special to me. I'm sort of described as being the person who brought the arms wide open theme to the National Trust of England, Wales and Northern Ireland back when I started as Director General a very long time ago now. And I'm going to tell you a little story about that this afternoon, so I won't say more now. But it's a wonderful reminder of how that idea of warm engagement with all communities and all people has become so central to our movement. As National Trust, we are all established for everyone, forever. And I think today's theme, and the theme we're going to be exploring in many different ways this week, is all about how we can reach out to all parts of our communities in all environments and in all circumstances. That is so important, I think, to the passion and the reason why we all care so much. It's also, I should say, a really exciting time for Into itself. Now, you all know Catherine. Where is she? Catherine Leonard, our wonderful Secretary General. So, where would we be without Catherine? She does a marvellous job, and we're given the opportunity now to do an even more marvellous job because we are thrilled to announce that we've secured a 3-year grant from the Helen Hamlin Foundation, to whom I also record publicly our deepest thanks, to enhance our programme of engagement and support for national trusts around the world. And the physical embodiment of that new grant is also here in Alex Bishop. So Alex, please, welcome. Now, Alex is our Deputy Secretary General. I don't want anyone to leave this conference without talking to Alex, as well as to Catherine, as you always do, about what he's going to be doing, because we have the chance both to grow the National Trust movement, looking for new members, and we're delighted to welcome the Petra National Trust as our newest member, but some of the other members who have arrived here are very, very welcome, particularly those from some of the Caribbean countries who we are hoping to entice formally into membership over the next couple of years. But there are other national trusts throughout the world or similar organisations that we'll be reaching out to. Secondly, we are really keen to make the family of national trusts and the way that we can support national trusts work even better than it does now through a programme called Tap Into, very neat description. And so Alex is going to be running that programme and developing that programme, and would love to talk to all of you about how we can enhance the support we give to you all as a family. We have some money now to put behind that, so there's no excuse for not coming up with brilliant ideas. So please talk to each other, talk to Alex, and develop ideas that we can then progress after the conference. And finally, we want to keep the voice of the National Trust movement alive. We've heard from the Governor this morning and from the Minister of Education just how important the values that we represent are to society, which, wherever we come from, is struggling with all kinds of constitutional and other challenges. The values that the National Trusts represent about loving places that mean so much to us, loving the beauty and the natural environment, and how much that means to us as a society, are values that are eternal and abiding and critical for our well-being. So nothing, in a sense, is more important than that we share our experiences throughout the world, work together, and remind the whole world how critical it is to look after the beautiful, natural, and historic environment that we can assist with for future generations all over the world. Thank you very much indeed.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome our Deputy Premier, or the Acting Premier today. How are you, sir? Please, if you'd like to.
Thank you, Mr. White, and welcome to everyone who's here this morning. Happy to be in the company of my colleague, the Honorable Deanna Rebane, Minister of Education, of course, is actually the Governor. We were supposed to we normally have a meeting in Wednesday mornings, but it's clear where the Governor has been today. But this is certainly, I think, a much better place to be than the doldrums of Government House. On behalf of the Government of Bermuda and her people, I am delighted to welcome you all to the 18th International Conference of National Trusts and the 4th Caribbean Conference of National Trusts and Preservation Societies here in Bermuda. The conference's theme, Arms Wide Open, and focuses on the themes of diversity and inclusion. Bermuda's population and history are rich in diversity and draw on many different cultures to make our island a very unique place. The government recognizes the importance of ensuring that everyone's story in our community will be told and shared, and has placed an emphasis on ensuring that parts of the community whose histories have been undertold in the past, neglected or unfortunately diminished, are now taking their rightful place. The government has joined the worldwide movement towards eliminating single-use plastics. We all have a part to play in this, in reducing the risk this does pose to our climate, to our oceans, and work to remain healthy and productive, and to make sure that the future of our oceans and our environment is better than they are now. And it is fitting that this is an inclusion of this topic in the conference program. I'm also quite excited that there are so many islands from the region represented here, as I've been informed. It's always exciting for us to have our Caribbean brothers and sisters here, and other islands throughout the world that are represented. So I would like to have a special welcome to other islands that are represented here today. We all share a unique experience, much different from the larger countries of the world, and we are the first line of exposure to climate change and to the realities that that brings to the planet. So it is wonderful that we're all here together to be a part of a movement that's going to be a part of the change that our globe needs to pursue. So I wish this conference and everyone here a successful and productive experience in Bermuda, and I hope that you will leave with fond memories of what our beautiful home is about, and a determination that you will come back sometime soon. Thank you.
To the International Group of National Trusts, welcome to Bermuda. My name is Michael Douglas, and I'm proud to say that I'm a Bermudian. My mother's family has been on the island for 400 years. I had my first birthday here in 1945, and we have had a home in our family since then. My wife Catherine and I, we lived on the island for 10 years of our marriage, raised our children here, and had an extraordinary, wonderful time. And while we've been in Bermuda, I've become very aware of the National Trust and the great job that Bill Zuhl and his whole team do. And it is a wonderful reflection in maintaining what our island is about, its culture, its history. It is the soul, really, of mankind, and certainly of Bermuda. I compliment and award all of you for working so hard in all of your respective countries at such a crucial time in terms of our environment and our history, that you have maintained it. I'm very sorry that I cannot be there with you today. I'm out here in Los Angeles, but I hope all of you have a chance to tour Bermuda, get around, and learn what it is to have a wonderful, Bermuda-ful day. Thank you.
Good morning. It's not too bad. Actually, before I start, let's just do a little housekeeping. Bermudians are described as some of the most friendliest people on the planet, and salutations are extremely important. And when we give a greeting, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, it is normally repeated with the same enthusiasm and vigor. So we're going to try it one more time, and I think this is a good group, so I think we'll only need the one time. Good morning. Good morning. Great. Welcome to Her Royal Highness Princess Dana Firas of Jordan, to His Excellency the Governor, Mr. John Rankin, the Deputy Premier and Minister of Home Affairs, the Honorable Walter Robban, the Minister of Education, Honorable Diallo Rebane, the Mayor of St. George's, Quinnell Francis, Chairman of the International National Trust, Dame Fiona Reynolds, Queen Quet, welcome. All distinguished guests, the International Steering Committee, conference delegates, family, and friends. It's wonderful to see you all here on this beautiful day. On behalf of the Bermuda National Trust, it is our pleasure to welcome you to the 18th International Conference of National Trusts and the 4th Caribbean, or the 3rd, as some may say, conference. We are excited to share the beauty of our island with you and honored to be your hosts. The theme of this year's conference is Arms Wide Open. This focuses on diversity and inclusion in the conservation of our heritage, but is also very fitting for our island, as a common architectural feature of many of our homes are the welcoming arms. A set of stairs on the facade of a building, wider at the base, tapering upwards, mimicking a warm embrace. We felt this theme would be meaningful for national trusts of all sizes and other like-minded organizations. As such, the presentations and breakouts have all been created with this open concept in mind. While we hope that you find value in all the conference has to offer, we also hope that your time here in Bermuda will be a memorable one. 2019 also marks a milestone for the Bermuda National Trust, as it coincides with the founding 50 years ago. Had the Monuments Trust not had the foresight back then to recognize a need for such an organization, I have no doubt that Bermuda would look drastically different today. They understood the meaning for everyone forever, as well as appreciating the uniqueness of our island. Mark Twain said it best, "You can go to heaven if you want. I'd rather stay here in Bermuda." I have no doubt that after your time here, you will share the same sentiments. Lastly, I would like to extend our sincere thanks to our various sponsors, partners, Bermuda National Trust staff and volunteers, and the local community. Without them, this conference really would not have been possible. Thank you all very much, and welcome.
Dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure for me to speak to you all from UNESCO headquarters in Paris, and I deeply regret that I cannot be with you in Bermuda due to other commitments at the UNESCO World Heritage Center. I greatly appreciate the work of the International National Trust Organization, NTO. In particular, I'm grateful to the international and diverse network of your organization for its commitment to conserving and sustaining our shared heritage. I'm aware that World Heritage is an important part of your work. As director of the 1972 World Heritage Convention Secretariat, a unique international legal instrument that links together protection of both natural and cultural heritage of outstanding universal value, I rely on you to support our efforts and play your important role at the national and field level. Our challenges are numerous and tough and require synergy, collaboration, and collective efforts. Conflicts, climate change, mining, large-scale infrastructure projects, unsustainable tourism, illegal trade in endangered species, invasive species, and many other issues need to be addressed together as a matter of urgency with the active involvement of all social, technical, and political stakeholders. Participation is certainly key for success. As the theme of this edition of your conference is strategies for engaging with diverse communities, I would like to say some words regarding the steps recently taken to integrate communities, including indigenous peoples, into the processes of the World Heritage Convention. As a first milestone, I would like to mention the Budapest Declaration 2002 and the discussion that followed to add communities as the fifth C in its strategic objectives for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention. The term community complemented the already existing objectives related to credibility, conservation, capacity building, and communication. The committee also recognized in its decisions the important role of indigenous and local communities in the conservation and management of World Heritage Sites. In 2012, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention. As a central theme for this celebration, we highlighted the role that local communities and indigenous peoples play as custodians of many World Heritage Sites, and noted the important role that conservation that the Convention can play in fostering local sustainable development. These commitments were further confirmed by the General Assembly of State Parties to the World Heritage Convention in 2015 with the adoption at its 20th session of the policy document for the integration of a sustainable development perspective into the processes of the World Heritage Convention. The policy provides a key framework to support states parties in operationalization the World Heritage Convention to continue to sustainable development and the Agenda 2030 at the national level. In the same direction, the revisions to the operational guidelines approved by the 39th session of the World Heritage Committee in Bonn 2015 included, for the first time, a reference to the 2007 United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, with regard to indigenous peoples' engagement in the protection and conservation of world heritage. States parties are further encouraged to prepare nominations with the widest possible participation of stakeholders and to demonstrate, as appropriate, that the free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous peoples has been obtained through inter alia, making the nominations publicly available in appropriate languages and public consultations and hearings. Of course, I will not forget to mention here the various initiatives organized on these topics by the three advisory bodies to the World Heritage Committee, ICROM, ICOMOS, and IUCN, together with the World Heritage Center and other stakeholders, including connecting practices. These initiatives also aim to increase the understanding and the practical options related to the rights dimension in World Heritage, such as our Common Dignity Initiative. Last but not least, practical efforts have been carried out to support the engagement of communities and indigenous peoples in the conservation and management of World Heritage. As a successful example, I would like to mention here the Community Management of Protected Areas for Conservation, the Compact Initiative. This initiative aims at recognizing, documenting, and formalizing traditional management systems for effective management of Africa's World Heritage. Thanks to a partnership between UNESCO and the UNDP-implemented Global Environment Facility Small Grants Program, and through cooperation agreement between UNESCO and the African World Heritage Fund. Furthermore, an indigenous peoples group of experts was established in 2018, which is a major step forward. As you can see, communities play an increasing role in the framework of the World Heritage Convention. Your work is, therefore, of great pertinence and interest for me as director of the World Heritage Center and for the entire World Heritage community. In this context, allow me to express once again my deep appreciation for the work of the International National Trusts Organization. I wish you a fruitful and successful conference. Thank you very much.
So I get the dubious but important role of thanking our sponsors in detail, which may not seem that exciting, but is hugely important for us both putting on this conference both on a local scale and then also internationally as well. So I'm going to read you a list. I resist the temptation to race through it, but we do want to single out our sponsors and partners who have been so helpful to us in putting the conference on. So first and foremost, the 1772 Foundation, and I believe Mary Anthony is here. There we go. If you want to. Chubb, Butterfield Bank, FIL Limited, and Aspen Insurance, all of which are silver sponsors of the conference and local businesses. We then have some supporting sponsors, Pure Water, who are providing all of the water you will drink in your bottles this week. Goslings, who are turning the water into wine. And then the oil group of companies who also have been very important in terms of supporting some delegates to the conference as well. We would be remiss if we didn't mention our partners as well. The Fairmont Southampton Hotel, where many of you are staying. The National Museum of Bermuda, where we will be tomorrow, who have been incredibly generous in both in allowing us to use their space and also providing their staff in support. And so Elena Strong, who is here and is carefully waving and trying not to be noticed. Also the St. George's Foundation, the operators of this site, the World Heritage Centre, and led by Peter Frith, who equally has given amazing amounts of time and put up with us all through yesterday as we were throwing banners up and all the rest, and he is at the back of the room. Many of you already met him. And then One World Airlines, British Airways, American Airlines, Qatar, and Qantas, and others. Many of you, I think, did make use of the discounted flights that they offered. Jardines, who helped us enormously with our fundraising. And then finally, and certainly last but not least, the Bermuda Tourism Authority, who have also been incredibly supportive and to whom we are very grateful. And I will say on that we are working with the authority as a conservation organisation to build better ties between conservationists and tourism. As you know, that's going to be a topic of many of the breakout groups and discussions, and we're very glad to have them on board with us. My next job is to introduce you to the Worshipful Quinnell Francis, Mayor of St. George's, our UNESCO World Heritage Site. Also the Chairman of the St. George's Preservation Authority, on which I have the pleasure of serving as well, and a dedicated public servant.
I have the honor of welcoming you all to the town of St. George, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a living community with over 400 years of history. And I will encourage each of you to walk through our streets, take pictures of the oldest buildings in Bermuda, from St. Peter's Church to the Tucker's Museum, and the beautiful scents of the perfumery, which is also in a National Trust building. History is very important, and I salute the president of the Bermuda National Trust and her team for hosting this conference. On behalf of the people of St. George, I wish you all a wonderful stay in Bermuda, particularly St. George, and I know that you will definitely want to come back. Thank you very much.
We now have the film that has been put together by Into. I think this is a slightly shorter version. You may see this again during the conference because I know that Catherine Leonard and the rest of her team are extremely proud of it. So, without further ado.
We are into. From Guernsey, we are into.
Nosotros into.
We are into. We are into. We are into. We are into.
You're into.
I-N-T-O.
Ciao, io sono into.
We're into. You say into. We are into.
Ciao,
We are into.
I'm into. Dwi into.
And now it is my distinct pleasure to invite Marquetta Goodwine, author and environmental advocate, also known as Queen Quet, after being elected chiefess and head of state for the Gullah Geechee Nation. And Queen Quet will be giving our first keynote address of the conference on the topic of opening your arms.
Don't you get weary, work together till don't you get weary, great have meeting in the promised land. So great together till don't you get weary, great together till don't you get weary, great together till don't you get weary.
Great. What kind of thing this is? Y'all supposed to crack your teeth better than that. And see, in was if I be there home in the Sea Islands, just across the way from you, you could get to Wilmington, North Kakalaki. And then you did most of what we did. The Gullah Geechee Nation start Jacksonville, North Kakalaki, and going all the way down Jacksonville, Florida. So we did in the ocean too, and things like that, just on the other side. And so when we get together and things like that, everybody join in. And I know such a thing, say, I don't walk and Hunter to look at me. If I don't walk, Hunter to walk. Because whatever we do, if everybody join in together. So when I first heard about coming over here and things like that, long time ago I said, I've been going to get you to Bermuda. But every time, I say, okay, God must have want me for go another time. Then every time again. Then finally I get this your email from this young man, see, in Oliver. And he asked, you want to come to Bermuda? I said, sure. So they said, okay, look, y'all, come on over, because the trust won't be there. Now, any place where trust at, I won't be there. You know? Because in the world now, it's hard for gain trust. So, plenty of time, we can't get on anything like that, because when we in the crack, we teach the people now stand tall talk. So how we want to trust one another when we in the crack, we teach so. So it's a little difficult to gain trust when you're not even speaking the same language, right? Because you don't know what's going on. And so it was so wonderful to hear that there was something that I could get into, all right? And so to be here is definitely an honor, and it's a journey. And it was so interesting to me as I got ready to pack and started putting things together to come. I kept saying to myself, wow, wonder what the Spirit will lead me to do when I get there. Then I get an email saying, oh, Queen Quet will lead song and talk. I said, oh, I didn't know they were listing it. Right? They said, isn't that part of the protocol? I said, well, not officially, but I tend to be led of the Spirit, and yes, I usually sing. So as I was walking through my living room, I suddenly kept hearing this theme, arms wide open. But then the words did what they usually do when my people take the English words and put them into the Gullah language and then created our dialect, which is called Geechee. The words move around. Like when people who speak Spanish look at English, the words have to move around to make sense in their language. So it didn't come to me as arms wide open. It came to me as open arms. And so I said to Kwame, I said, well, that's interesting, because more often than not, with a lot of the national trusts that I've engaged with, they don't tend to have their arms open. Folks tend to be like this, because they're coming around inspecting whether that property has historical integrity or not. And they're determining by the rules and regulations that they function under in their particular country and the auspices of their organizations, whether or not this can be listed or not. Right? So the community members are like this. Like, what do they mean that this can't? We've already told these people this place has been here 150 years. How dare them come in here for 15 minutes and tell us that it shouldn't be listed as historic, that it isn't valuable enough to preserve. How dare they? And meanwhile, you have one this way and one this way, but nobody's doing this. Right? So I said, interesting. I'm walking through the living room, and suddenly I start hearing, here I come to you with open arms, and it stops. And I said, wait a minute, 80s, 90s, rock music, pop music, who sang this song, right? Who's a DJ, sing the song, and he'd instantly do what he usually does and say the thing, but he did. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. I had never heard that song in my life. I said, that's the hook. That's the chorus. What do you mean? It's very famous. Not to me. I never heard it. I said, go to YouTube. Go to YouTube. And there it is. Why I was supposed to wait to take this journey. The group Journey sang that song. I see some of you nodding. I saw you had a few dates for that song. I see smiles, nods. People like, yeah, keep going, Queen. I remember that one. But I said, I can't sing that song. That song is rather sad. It's a breakup song. Oh my goodness. When you look at all the lyrics. But then I said, that's what we're trying to prevent, is a breakup between those of us who work wanting to preserve and wanting to conserve things, and the others who say, but you're not doing the ones that we find significant enough, because you're telling us that that's not the way to do it. So I said, we have to build trust. And the easiest way that people throughout the world usually build trust is with their arms open. If you come towards someone like this, they feel you're not coming in battle. But if you come like this, they have to get on the defense because they don't know what you're hiding. If you come this way, we pretty much all know what's going on. Especially, right, ladies? Yes. So, having our arms open is critical to the work that all of us engage in. And so I tossed and I turned and I tossed and I turned, because there's something about words and I always find acronyms in words. And so as I looked at this word last night, arms, I said, I know there's an acronym there. And I heard all kinds of things moving around in my mind after midnight when I was trying to sleep. And then woke me up again maybe around 2, and I'm like, you're not the ones either, go away. All right, I need the right words. And all of a sudden when they came, I rested. Advancing resources, motivating sustainability. Advancing resources, motivating sustainability. Because for me, I don't like to deal with the word preservation as it relates to cultural heritage. I come from a living community in the Gullah Geechee Nation, as I mentioned, from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida, on what are called sea islands, and 30 to 35 miles inland, and what people often write down and call the country, because we are technically below sea level. But more often than not, when people come to where we are, they yet we don't correct, we teach us so and things like that, and they say, oh no, what is that? They're not familiar with our language, and then because they can't communicate with us, they don't communicate with us, they don't even try. If they did, they'd learn we could talk like this too. And a few might say, ¿Qué pasa con estas? All right? Or someone might even ask, Je parle français. But they never ask. They only come in based on research that they've done, maybe in a library, maybe something that they read about when they were children, a map they found, and they want to now be the pirates that discover the treasure that's located in this place. Especially, there's someone else here from a St. Helena. Who is that? I'm from St. Helena. You, yes. I too am from St. Helena. And your St. Helena and my St. Helena often get confused because they're all looking for where Napoleon, right? And so in our jobs, we have to often correct the narrative, but sometimes we recreate a narrative that the people who are the descendants from that place don't even recognize. And then we lose the trust we were supposed to be building. And now where they were like this, they become like you, like this. Or they come like this, okay? Because they're saying, where did you get that story? That's not what we know to be the truth. As we say, we don't been here, ain't never I know we told. So in the coming out of coming we don't. So you have to speak to those who live that legacy, live that culture, and know what the resources that they have, resources that they are, so that they can be a part of the movement that you are working on. So that they too, when you leave and go back to your respective offices or these conferences that you all are having in such exotic places throughout the world, that they are still left motivated to sustain the work of keeping these places so valuable and so treasured by us, that our mayors can say, come, walk our streets, and walk in those same places and spaces that people have walked for over 400 years. And look at the stories you might find. Like in this building, almost right below where I'm standing, are the words of my home, Wilmington and Charleston, on the wall, right below me. Before I got to step in the building, I was told that we were going to go where no man or woman had gone before. He asked me, Queen, are you familiar with Enterprise? I said, do you mean Star Trek? And he said, no ma'am, I mean the ship that brought enslaved people here, but not from Africa, but from your sea islands. We have to talk. I said, and we have to share. Because I knew I'd always been drawn to wanting to get to Bermuda for a reason, to walk, not just the streets, but along the shore. I knew there was an energy that pulled me here that couldn't be Googled. You can Google all day and put in Gullah Geechee, Bermuda, nothing. Sea Island, Bermuda, nothing. You put in something else in Civil War, then we might talk about gun running. We don't talk about goslings that was in the ships as well, but we talk about cotton that you all call white gold, where the cargo that looked like me was called black gold. And here it is, all this was being exchanged back and forth across this body of water. Before there was an internet, before there was social media, before we had phones, much less cell phones, we were more connected, it seemed, because we did as the water does. We flowed together. Water finds its own level, and it can move. And that's what we need to learn to do, is be able to flow and to move and keep our arms open so that the resources we have, whether they are environmental or natural resources, human resources, built environmental resources, as we would say even in the world of all of this, the tangible and the intangible resources, that these are all collectively a part of our journey when we start talking about preservation, which is more off the term that you use, instead of the term I prefer, continuation. Because when we talk about cultural heritage and legacies and stories, we need those things to be continued. Because my mother and I do preservation of food. We jar food. And that jar sits on the shelf. It looks very pretty there until you're ready to devour it. Once you open it up and you let air in, if you let it sit, it's going to spoil. So you don't let it sit. You pour it in a pot and you heat it up and you devour it. But now it's gone. You can rinse the jar out. It's empty. So when we talk about cultural communities, we cannot preserve them. We need to continue them because we don't want to destroy them and then nothing's there. So there is no story, there is no narrative. We act as if, I heard the word untold stories are not told enough. Some are never told because someone doesn't value the oral tradition. Someone else only values the written. And they'll say, well, so what? You all say that happened for 400 years, but where is it written? It's written here, in the hearts of the people whose ancestors passed it down. And as we would say in the church, thought it not robbery for their children's children's children to know their story, their legacy, and what they contributed to a particular place and space in the world. So we have to take this from the hearts to the minds and get into shifting the narrative of how we do the work that all of us do together so that there'll be more trust in the world amongst us. And we can now motivate others to using what their knowledge bases are to sustain these things that we're fighting so hard for in the face of climate change, in the face of just natural degradation, in the face of moral degradation in the world. We need to change the way we look at things. But again, if we don't speak the same language, maybe that's the problem. So I decided to go look in a English-based dictionary to find out, what do you all mean when you use the word preserve? It said a sphere of activity regarded as being reserved. So I said, well, that's so true, because usually the sphere of activity that is done by the National Trust is considered reserved for specialists who have degrees and other things in this field. So I said, that's interesting, that fits. That's why they love the word so much. It fits with what they do. But then it says, to maintain something in its original state or existing state. I said, that's why they don't want you to show them a building where your grandparents added on, as we call it, adding on, building up and bricking up are other terms for it, meaning that at first you had a one-bedroom home, but as you advanced in life, you had more children, you added bedrooms for them. You might have opened out the living room, so you built it on. So sure, the original house looks like wood and all the other edges look like brick, but it's one house to us. What do you mean that there's no historic integrity there? There's integrity because it was a family protecting each other for generations. Why is it that when multimillionaires add on, because it's all made of the same stone now, because it all comes from the same brick, we don't say that those mansions are not valuable for us to preserve. We trust that they are. And we say that whatever president, whatever man or woman of industry, whatever titan lived there, had a valuable enough story that the world ought to see it. And people visit by the millions and they make millions of dollars from it. And where do we see the little things on the side of the wall that say National Trust? This is a National Trust building. We promote those places. So why not promote a Gullah Geechee home that has that value just because the center might be wood and the edges might be brick? The wings, as we would call it if it were a mansion, right? So we have to just shift our perspective, because then you say, well, maintain it in the original state, which would have meant just the wooden house. So a lot of times they rip off the brick, and now they'll say, well, now we have the house back to its original state. But what about the existing state? The existing state is what is the story and the narrative you can tell from every piece that was added. Every generation had another part of that family's legacy to tell. And if we tear it away now, someone in 50 or 100 years wouldn't value what that son or daughter that grew up in that extra bedroom did. And they might have accomplished even more than the original builder of the building. So you have to consider that. Then I said, whatever the definitions they have, you see I love words. So I dove in a little bit more, and they said, to keep safe from harm or injury. I said, well, people don't consider that with cultural heritage, do they? Because communities are harmed and feel injured when they're told that something they value is not valuable enough to meet all the boxes that we check off as we register these places as being places of value. So they are hurt, they are injured, and they can't get into what we're into. If they are, who would? You wouldn't. So then it says, allow for evolution and expansion. I said, oh, they never taught them that definition. That part is missing. Allow for that evolution and expansion to happen, and know that no culture is static. So no story of a group of people and a legacy of a place should be static either. Today, we've made history, and ladies, her story, because it is Women's Her Story Month. Because I don't know in your third, fourth conferences that have been held here that you've ever had a native Gullah Geechee come over and enter this enterprise this time. When Enterprise landed here before, I understand it got shipwrecked. A storm brought it in. A storm brought me in yesterday. The winds and the rain and everything. And I prayed that the sun is coming out. It's going to shine. It's going to warm up. These people cannot be serious that they're not warmer than where I live at this time of year. These folks ain't praying right is what I would have said. We got to do this right. So God worked with me as I tossed and turned through the night, and it got warmer and warmer in the room. And when I stepped out this morning, all bundled in my coat, the Spirit said, you won't need it. You won't need it. You'll be able to open your arms in the sun and have other people join you in doing that. So I came to you with open arms from our sea islands to have a Bermuda-ful day here as we all get into this together. And I know the conference organizers are about to have a stroke when I ask you to do this. But if any of you are also willing to open your arms and form a circle of connection around this room that will recognize that our journey is that we're now connected around the world to actually making sure that we are allies in taking these resources out so that we can motivate others to sustain the places and the things that we so love. You'll join in the circle together. So isn't this wonderful? We can stretch out and make one broad, wide circle. Y'all coming a little closer to me. There we go. Yeah. Look at the beauty of this. This is truly Bermudaful, right? This is Bermudaful. Because I felt like I was right at home when they gave you the instructions that I give at home. That when someone says to you, good morning, you say good morning. If they say good afternoon, you say good afternoon. If they say good evening, you say good evening. If they look older than you, you say good evening, ma'am. Good evening, sir. Now, I know some of y'all get offended because they're like, I'm not older, though. But they didn't know. They're just being respectful. And so I appreciate that we respect one another so much and respect each cultural community that's represented from around the world, that we have all stood together now. We're all one circle. That you notice we couldn't have joined if we'd kept our arms like that. Right? We had to open our arms, and I pray that we'll raise them together to show the strength that we have, that we're all going to keep getting into this, and we are going to change the narrative of the world to say that every place has cultural heritage that's valuable in those built places, as well as the natural resources that we all have. So I come to you with open arms, with love, peace, and understanding. Wisdom is the principal thing. But in all thy getting, get understanding. Thank you, N2, for helping us understand the journey that you do. Peace and blessings.
Thank you, and I love this evening. Well, I think we can just declare the conference over now because and unfortunately, of course, I'm going to introduce the person who has to now follow Queen Quet and try to top that. But thank you so much. That was extraordinary. So yeah, now for something completely different. It is my real great pleasure to introduce my friend, Dr. Brent Fortenberry. Brent is an assistant professor of archaeology and architectural history, and he'll correct me if I get the full title wrong, at Texas A&M University. Previously, he was a professor from Queen Quet's neck of the woods at Clemson near Charleston. Oh, yeah, see. It's all one big country to me. And Brent has been visiting and doing research in Bermuda now for 15 years. Has done many great archaeological digs, including on National Trust properties, including Verdmont, which some of you have been to and some of you will go to, and then also very largely in the town of St. George's, including now for the last 3 years, doing an architectural survey of the entire core of the 17th and 18th century town. So he is going to tell us a bit about the history of Bermuda from 1609 to around the time of the American Revolution, and also tell us a bit about his research and Bermuda's place in the Atlantic world as well. So please give a warm hand to Brent.
Thanks very much, Bill. It does feel weird for me to be standing on a box with everyone else, because I'm normally the only one that has to stand on a box, because how short I am. And actually, this is not the first time that I've followed Queen Quet at a conference, so I was prepared to be outshone. I used to live in Charleston, South Carolina, and worked for Clemson there, and am doing research in the Santee Delta actually right now. So, I think a few of the things that she mentioned actually ring quite true for me as an academic, and I should say that whenever I need to be pulled off the stage, just someone give me the hook, because you give an academic more than 20 minutes, he's going to ramble on for a long time. But I think one of the things that is shifting in preservation education, particularly in the United States, is this shift from preservation and conservation to issues of durability and resilience. And I think these are the major foci that we're teaching theoretically, and we need to put them into practice as well, particularly in the face of issues of sustainability and climate change, thinking more about how buildings, how spaces, how the built environment change over time, how they are dynamic entities. I think it's a much better way for us to approach the way that we make durable both tangible and intangible aspects of the past. I should also say that I think one of the major shifts as well that's happening is we are teaching our students to become stakeholders in the communities in which they're working. And I think for me, especially here in Bermuda and in the other places that I work, I consider myself a stakeholder. I don't consider myself to be an exterior academic. I consider myself, I want to be embedded in the community if they will have me. And so viewing, sorry, that's my phone, if you could turn that off. No, I'm kidding. So considering ourselves stakeholders in the communities. My students come from Texas, from South Carolina, from Virginia. We go to different places throughout the greater Caribbean. That's the moniker that we use. I say greater Bermuda when I'm here, greater Caribbean when I'm in Point South. We teach our students to become stakeholders in the places that they work, and we want them to come back beyond the academic research that we do. I actually had a few students here who came with me in January on spring break a few weeks ago, just because they love St. George's and they love the island. So really imparting these issues of durability, resilience, and becoming stakeholders in the community is where I'm hoping that my generation of academics is pushing our students to work. So today I want to talk very briefly, and my role here is to bookend the tour you're doing after lunch. So again, when I start to see the food, the hangriness of the crowd, I will stop. Bookend the tour that you'll be doing this afternoon at St. George's, and it is the first part of a longer talk that Dr. Harris will continue tomorrow at a dockyard. Thinking about St. George's, its first 2 centuries of occupation, and then also the conservation and preservation work that's been going on here since really the 1930s. So here's St. George's today. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to take drones up because we're within a mile of the airport. So this is a 1998 helicopter view of the town. Have you all walked down there yet? No. So we are on the western end of the town here, and I don't have a laser pointer on here, I don't think. Do I have a laser pointer on it? No. In the center there is King Square, and that's really the heart of St. George's. But one of the major challenges of a living town is that we have multiple periods of occupation. We have living buildings. We have buildings that people live in today. And so finding that balance between livable spaces that people want to live in historic buildings, and then also making durable those elements of architectural, archaeological, and intangible heritage are the primary thrusts of my research and research that's been happening with the National Trust, with the St. George's Foundation, with the National Museum over the last 15 years here. This is the only slide in which there are more than 2 or 3 words on, I promise. A very brief history of preservation and conservation research here in St. George's. In the 1950s, the Protection of Buildings of Special Interest Act And if the acting heritage officer in the back, if there's any errors, please stand up and say so. In 1974, the listing system based on the UK system was implemented, and that listing process began in 1991, very much led by the Bermuda National Trust. And it was very much a exterior windshield survey, if you will. And that's not to be negative about it, that's the process that they undertook in the early 90s. Today, 229 listed buildings are within St. George's and St. George's Island. That includes grade HM, grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3 listings. In 2000, UNESCO heritage status, and then in the 2000s, what we would consider in the United States design guidelines and developmental guidelines were also put out by the planning department to begin to try and retain that authenticity. And that is, for me as an academic, that's a big, difficult word to wrap your arms around. Because authenticity is very subjective. Authenticity is something that is a collaborative and at the same time individual notion of how the past is represented and made durable. And so I think finding that balance between those developmental guidelines and authenticity and how people perceive, embrace, and live in this town is so important. Particularly for me as an outsider, but wanting to be a stakeholder, to me that is one of the roles that for me as an academic with resources from a university and with students, I try to bring to the table, to provide help and support and resources in a partnership, not as a one-to-one from exterior, come down from the mountain academic. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. This is the conservation area here from satellite map. And here really gives you a good understanding of the architectural differentiation of the town. So all the buildings that are in that light red, they date between 1800 and 1900. And then the darker red buildings date prior to 1800. And so you see we have this wide breadth of architectural heritage. And so unlike places in, say, Virginia, where you have a large number of 17th and early 18th century buildings, we have a wide breadth of 400 years of occupation here in St. George's that presents both challenges but also great opportunities to tell different stories from multiple stakeholder communities. And I think that's one of the great things about St. George's is that there is not one single narrative that's being told. It is multiple, overlapping, inclusive, and diverse narratives of this town. And I think that it really should be looked at as a model for larger urban port towns to really embrace that diversity within how we understand the past within both the built environment and intangible heritage as well. So your tour this afternoon, you will go to every single one of these buildings inside and out. And someone mentioned about a quiz. As the academic, I'll be passing out quizzes at the end of your tour, and you'll be graded accordingly. If you fail, you'll have to measure a building with me tomorrow as opposed to going on the tour. So it might actually be fun. No, it's not. So again, this is this aerial image, and you'll walk through the core of the town this afternoon. I don't know what sites are on the docket, but you're going to hit some of the major 17th and late 17th, 18th, and 19th century buildings within the town. What I want to do is sort of step back from a broad aerial point of view and talk about the development of architecture and how that's sort of an urban landscape as an index of the changing nature of Bermuda itself. I should say Bermuda, again, supported by the National Trust and National Museum, is, and St. George's in particular, is unparalleled in terms of the number of academics that have come here and researched the town. As early as 1975, David Fleming did the first archaeological excavations at the Tucker House, and then throughout the 90s, the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, under the direction of Marley Brown, did a series of excavations throughout the town. And then in the 2000s, Bristol University came, and then I began to come in the 2006 with Boston University, and then Clemson, and now Texas A&M, moving further south as I go. But what's unparalleled is the amount of archaeological and architectural research that's been undertaken within the town of St. George's. And this has encompassed excavations on the left here, and then also architectural recording as well. So all of these sites have been major excavations by archaeologists throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and there is a mountain of archaeological material culture that needs to still be interpreted, that is sitting in Hollinger boxes both here and elsewhere. But it provides, again, archaeology and architectural recording provides for a unique set of material culture and immaterial culture to understand the diverse aspects of St. George's past. And so I really just want to take a moment and thank the Trust and the National Museum for their stewardship and their willingness to really push forward archaeological and architectural research in St. George's and the island, where so many other places throughout the Caribbean, throughout even the United States, people just don't have that push. So I just want to say thank you to them right now. But let's step back and do a history lesson now, all right? And I promise, I will not make you go to sleep. I can't promise that. But excluding the Sea Venture wreck, we will set that aside, which you all know very well from reading Shakespeare in 9th and 10th grade in primary school. The town of St. George's was established in 1612, and we have this occupation of a private joint stock company, the Somers Island Company, between 1612 and 1684. It is the longest surviving joint stock company in the British Empire. And then after that, from 1684 until 1815 in St. George's, we have what's known as the Crown period, where it also served as the capital of the island. And so I'm going to march us through what the architecture and what the urban landscape of those two periods look like very quickly. So this is probably, has anyone seen this before? Non-Bermudians? Downstairs. So this is John Smith's engraving of Bermuda from his History of the Bermudas, and it gives us really the best and most accurate, as far as we know, understanding of what the 17th century town looks like. One of the things we'll talk about in a minute is there's a lack of surviving archaeological evidence from the 17th century. Much of that has to do with, again, because this is a living and breathing town, we as archaeologists have yet to be able to locate that. Whereas I used to work at Jamestown in Virginia. They picked up and left the fort area in 1626 and left the island in 1699, and they were basically just grazing pastures there, waiting for the 17th century archaeological material culture to be found. Unlike there, and unlike elsewhere, St. George's, as you all know, is still a living place. And so the material record is biased toward the 18th and 19th century. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that really illustrates the changing dynamic nature of the material past and how we need to treat it, not as a one-to-one, we set this down and that's it. We need to embrace the fact that these narratives change over time. We need to embrace the fact that new perspectives, new generations will have different priorities, have different perspectives on the way that the past can be told. And older isn't always better. It's definitely not. Coming from a place, I was born in Virginia, lived in Williamsburg for a very long time. It's 17th century or bust in so many places in Virginia. But older is not necessarily better. Change and how we can illustrate and understand change over time is really the value of what I do as a material scholar. So, as you all know, as you probably know from your history of Bermuda, the island was ringed with fortifications, as you can see around here, St. Catherine and Pembroke and King's Castle. Are y'all going to any of the forts? No? No.
We're going to Dockyard tomorrow.
On your next trip back, you will go to all the 17th century forts of Bermuda. And of our particular interest here is on the left-hand side of this panel, you can see the engraving of the town of St. George's as depicted in 1626. In the upper left-hand corner, you see St. Peter's Church, which we'll see in a minute, and you'll go to this afternoon. Not much, if anything, is left of this 17th century church. We have looked under the floorboards, looking for the original timber framing, the post holes, and found other things for another time. But not much of that church survives, and that makes sense because it was a timber frame structure. On the front, in front of there, you'll see a cruciform building that was the governor's mansion. Only one post hole, which I will show you, survives of that building. Everything else has been completely wiped out by 18th century occupation in the town. which again is a testament to the dynamic nature of living in St. George's. And then finally, in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see the State House, which is this great, how would anyone describe that building relative to all the other ones in this depiction? Square. Any architectural historians, how would you describe that? No? You all aren't going to pass your quiz, I'm going to tell you right now. Baroque, maybe? Continental? Italian? Classical? Some sort of classical aspects. It does not look like what we would consider a piece of vernacular architecture, relative to just the buildings that are above, that look like what we would consider early modern vernacular pieces of architecture. And we'll talk about that in a minute. What do you imagine, and I'm trying to keep you all awake, what do you imagine is a problem, given the weather yesterday, with a building that looks like that in Bermuda? Wet. The roof is effectively a bathtub, right? So here we have a great illustration of this, what we would call the creolization of architecture over time, and I'll show you what that looks like. Effectively, we have this piece of classical architecture that's being dropped in a place where they don't understand that 27 days out of the month it rains. Right? Is that right? It's 27? Maybe that? Sorry? Brief shouts. So this image from the 17th century, from 1626, is really all we have left of the 17th century built environment of St. George's. We have a series of renderings by a surveyor called Norwood over the 17th century, which provides, again, this sort of abstract picture of the town. Here you see it's a clustering of buildings. You can see sort of the classic tower of the church that didn't exist. It's just sort of cartographic depiction of it. This is from 1616, and then again in 1630, and then again in 1660. The town, in terms of number of buildings, doesn't change. Why is that? Because the Crown is not in charge of the colony and it's a private joint stock company, most of the agricultural efforts modeled on Virginia were tobacco during the opening decades of the 17th century. And so, much like Virginia, they would come here, they'd been given a plot of land, and they would be told by the company they had to grow tobacco. Unfortunately, the soil in Bermuda is not great for that. And it failed pretty quickly. It didn't help that tobacco went through the floor when the market was flooded from Virginia and elsewhere. But St. George's functioned as the capital of 17th century Atlantic outpost, and all of the goods and services came through St. George's. And so it became this hub that was very much populated during court days, during magazine ship days, and very much empty during those days in which those activities weren't happening. Much like in Virginia, much like even market towns in the UK in some cases, where you'd see a population swell and then go away based on functionality. And so St. George's during the 17th century wasn't really a vibrant, bustling urban center as we would consider today. Again, this is a map from Google, and again, I don't have a pointer, and I'm not tall enough to point here, but I don't want to sit there on the chair. In the center is St. Peter's Church, and at the bottom is where the governor's mansion was, and then on the right is the State House. Here is the State House today. You'll walk by that. How old do you think this facade is? No one? You all would not enjoy my classes because I ask people to answer a lot of questions. 17th century? Is it this? Early 1800s? 18th century, right? Some revivalism, right? I mean, that's so this facade is as old as I am. Anyone know how old I am? No. 1984. Right, and I'll show you what this building looked like prior to its restoration. This I was just seeing if you were paying attention. So this is, we'll come back to that. This is the excavation at the Bank of Bermuda car park looking for the structure that was the governor's mansion in the lower left-hand corner there up above the stocks. Digging in Bermuda in the summer in an asphalt car park is not fun, having done it myself. Any archaeologists here? No? Don't do it. You don't make enough money. But right there in the center, on the left-hand side of that trench, you can see the one 17th century post hole that's been recovered from the 17th century landscape of St. George's. That's it. There were 3 pieces of early 17th century tin glaze in it, and that's all we have. And it's a testament to, again, the revitalization of the town after the Crown period in 1684 and after, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then here's St. Peter's Church, which you all will go in later today. Nothing of that early 17th century building survives either. We do have late 17th century surviving buildings, and I'm not going to get into the weeds of what these mean architecturally, but you'll walk by Bridge House. Are you guys going in Bridge House? No? Maybe? No? Past it. Well, I'm staying upstairs, so if anyone wants to see upstairs, I'm drawing the roof later today. Bridge House is a great building from about 1699. Here you can see it actually originally on a deed there in the middle right-hand corner where they've actually laid it out and laid out the plot of land. It is what we consider a cruciform Bermuda building. And so what that means is you have a core, a hall parlor, and then you have a projecting, what you'd call in Virginia, a porch tower. We're calling here an enclosed porch that provides the circulation for the interior of the building. And so what that does, if you know anything about early modern buildings, is circulation pattern is very much related to who you were as a person and also your relationship to who lived in the building. And so these porches form the means to sort people, right? Based on who you were, that's how you move through the space. And so here's the back end of the cruciform as well, and you can see here, this is what the plan looks like. The front part on the bottom is that porch, and then you had 2 doors that actually led into either the upper room on the left, the hall, or the lesser room on the right, the parlor or chamber, whatever you wanted to call it. And so when you think about a building like this in terms of circulation, depending on who you were and what you did in your relationship to the people who owned the house, dictated how you moved through the space. One of the things that I'm not going to talk about today, but I really would like to at some point, is talking about the relationship between the people who owned houses and enslaved Africans in Bermuda, because that relationship is completely different than anywhere else in the greater Caribbean, in the Western Hemisphere, really. Architectural historian Ed Chappell called it a closer apart, meaning that the face-to-face relationships between white owners and enslaved Africans, bondsmen and women, were so face-to-face that there were not these separated spheres as you see in larger plantation societies in Virginia, in South Carolina, in Barbados, and Jamaica. And so because there wasn't a plantation culture here, it is very much you're on top of each other. And that fundamentally changed the nature of enslavement on the island. This is another building, Globe Hotel, which I know you'll be going into, hopefully. Here again, you see this cruciform building, this projecting front as well. And you'll go through the front door and you'll understand the way that you move through this space. Again, I show you these because this is the earliest survivors of architecture in the town. But what I see as the 1730s and 1740s go on is a right sizing of architecture on the island. And much of that has to do with environmental challenges, hurricanes, rain, lack of cedar for good wood building. And so you go from a building like this, which is 2 stories, cruciform with this huge common rafter roof, into, and here's a side image of it, into something like this, much smaller. We would call this a double pile building if you were taking my architectural history class. This is a single pile building at Stewart Hall. And so you have this sort of right sizing of architecture as the 18th century goes on. And so as you walk through the town today, you'll see a series of buildings that are on this scale. And then as we move deeper, as we move closer to the present, you'll see buildings that look like this, and even one-story buildings. And so what that is the constraint of lack of timber, not lack of stone, lack of timber for spanning wide spaces, because in the 18th century, as I'll talk about in a minute, they chopped down all the trees and used it for shipbuilding. And you're getting this sort of right sizing of architecture. This is what St. George's looks like in the first quarter of the 18th century, which is a much more bustling and sprawling town because now the company is no longer in charge of the island and they are free to trade with anyone within the burgeoning British Empire and even with people not within the empire. And so Bermuda effectively becomes, as you'll hear later today, the sort of hub for mercantile exchange. I like to tell my students they're like the FedEx of 18th century, or DHL, right? They're constantly moving goods around. They're not keeping goods here in Bermuda, they're moving them around very rapidly. So redevelopment of architecture, and you get a town that's no longer empty, a town that is filled with tons of new storehouses. And so much like Boston grows in this organic fashion in the 18th century once the mercantile trade goes wild, and then much like Bridgetown and Barbados grows throughout the middle of the 17th century as the sugar trade takes off. St. George's becomes much more of an urban place, a place of exchange between not only goods, but also people within the Atlantic world. And the access to goods in St. George's is unparalleled to so many other places. So we find things archaeologically that we wouldn't expect, like napkin holders. Think about that. You'd think you'd find a set of napkin holders at the Tucker House, which you'll go to after lunch. Again, this is another example of a map from Bridgetown and Barbados, the Mayo map from the early 18th century as well. And so, whereas in 17th century St. George's was very much this empty landscape, by the 18th century it becomes something that is much closer to its brethren in Bridgetown and in Boston as well. But as I said, the architecture changes fundamentally and it becomes right-sized. And so you begin to have single level buildings with smaller projecting porches as here in the old rectory, which you'll walk by. And then also here at Mitchell House, which again is smaller, slider in size with a hipped roof. And so they're leveraging the fact that it rains 27 days out of the year. They're catching all that water, putting it into cisterns because there are no fresh water sources on the island. And typically, this is a great example of a first quarter of the 18th century Bermuda house in that you have a single level of occupation above and storage below. So you could very easily move goods in and out at the lower level. Goods and slave service on the ground level and then living up above. And because there's not much to do in Bermuda in the 18th century, if you're on island, what do you think that means? A lot more children got produced. Why do more children get produced?
That's another class.
That is another class. My father was a PE teacher. Hospitality and sociability becomes a corner of Bermudian life in the 18th century, and the architecture reflects that. And so you have these great wide open double parlors as you move into the 1740s and 1750s that provide this great open space where not only you could drink, but you could also dance. So we have great late 18th century accounts of Bermudians throwing awesome parties that I would have loved to go to. They're having a party out there in the boat right now. Great big entertainment spaces where the people who are here could be entertained, converse, and consume rum. There are great rum punch recipes in the newspaper, which I've had my students tell me they've made. They're very good. They don't make a second batch that night, I'll say that. And then here is at the Tucker House, which we'll go to later today. Again, think about the relationship between that two-story cruciform house and then something like this at the end of the 18th century, where you're having these much slighter spaces, again, storage below and then two great rooms above. And so again, flexible doors to open them up for dancing and dining. This is what the State House looked like in the 18th century. Not that. And so you can see it really becomes a piece of Bermudian vernacular architecture because it needs to be, because a continental style building on Bermuda does not work. St. George's in the 18th century up until the American Revolution, again, it has this hodgepodge, whereas in Charleston, South Carolina, they're laying down these great new grids, the Grand Model, Shaftesbury, Locke. They're laying down these brand new capitals with straight lines St. George's doesn't have that. The prospect of Charleston as well, and then in Kingston as well. Anyone here from the JNHD? No? Kingston laid out after the Port Royal earthquake this massive urban grid. St. George's never gets that. It maintains its informal aspects as this living town, primarily because after the American Revolution, so much of the focus in Bermuda shifts west. And so after the loss of the American colonies, I apologize profusely. This is a view of Kingston. After the loss of the American colonies, so much of life that is the capital in St. George's shifts west. There was effectively a coup among the assembly. Everyone west of St. George's voted in a block to move the capital. It was moved to Hamilton. And the town here in the 19th century becomes garrisoned very, very quickly, with most of naval personnel on the island stationed here. And then it gets shifted, the capital gets shifted to Hamilton, which is here, and then where you'll be tomorrow, this great photograph of the Royal Naval Dockyard, which is a fabulous, fabulous place. And so because of that, I think a part of that provided, the shift away from St. George's provided for the level of preservation. There was still a great community of people here, but because you don't have that major amount of urban life, you begin to have a smaller group of people living here, and it provides for the preservation of buildings. So this is a great photograph. I still haven't figured out where this is, if anyone wants to take a look. I found this on Facebook. Margie Lloyd told me to be on this Facebook group, and this picture popped up. And Linda Aubin hasn't figured out where that is. But this is what St. George's looked like in the early 20th century. And there are architectural details I could talk about that are no longer here, but it provided this level of preservation for the town, which we experience today. And so one of the things that I'm partnering with the Trust to do is taking a holistic approach to documenting the architecture. And so we're doing everything from paint analysis to documenting buildings to build up this resource, this database of resources of the town. And really, I think it's a great model for students, but I think it's also a great model for the community in the sense of we bring students here, we work with local students as well, train them how to record architectural elements, train them how to do measured drawings, and then all this information gets made available in a publicly accessible database moving forward. So that's sort of my role as an academic here. So I will leave it at that. Thank you very much. Any questions? No?
We're good, I think. Yeah. If you want to do your follow-ups.
Everybody, thank you very much. We're going swimmingly well, and bear with me. I just want to do a brief thanks. We structured this when we started the process of organizing the conference into various different moving parts, and they've all integrated very well. I just want to recognize those individuals that have been involved in the planning and now the execution of the conference. Some of them won't be here because I hope they're busy elsewhere getting ready for everything else that's going on. But if I could just ask my local organizing committee to join me at the front, and then Oliver, immediately after that, I'll ask you and the International Steering Group to come on up. So if I can just call them by name. I had the pleasure of working with the Bermuda National Trust President, Alana Anderson. We had Jennifer Gray, a former executive director, many volunteers, Risa Hunter, Amanda Outerbridge, Helen Orchard, who is busy elsewhere, Mariette Savoy, who is busy at the registration desk this morning, Amy Shillingford, and Deanna Williams. Some of those are working, I know, elsewhere, but if you see these ladies around, here's Helen. at the back, please say thanks on my behalf, certainly, over the next few days. Thank you. The Bermuda Committee certainly wouldn't be what it was without some significant input from the International Steering Committee, which INTO and the Secretariat helped chair. That's bringing all of the knowledge from past international National Trust Organization conferences like we've heard about in Bali, Cambridge, Entebbe in Uganda, and the like. Oliver Maurice was the chair. Oliver, would you like to come forward? Justin Albert, National Trust England, Wales, Northern Ireland. Natalie Bull from National Trust of Canada. John DeConnick joined us from the Cross Cultural Foundation of Uganda. Emily Drani, his co-chair at CCFU. Emily, unfortunately, wasn't able to join us here in Bermuda. She got bumped in Entebbe trying to get through London, believe it or not. Catherine Malone, France, NTHP. Catherine Leonard, our Secretary General. Bill Turner, our hardworking IT and general communications every which way, many of which I don't understand because I'm not a Twitterer or a tweeter. Myself and Bill Zuhl, the Executive Director of the Bermuda National Trust. So that's the International Steering Committee. And then, thank you. All of that would not have happened without, thank you everybody, all of that would not have happened without the hardworking team at the Bermuda National Trust. Alana and Bill's team of support staff at the Trust, and I'll just list some of them. Vincent Shaves, who is with us, come on up, you guys, wherever you are. You know who I'm gonna talk about. Danella joins him in the finance team. Dorota Horsfield is our Director of Education. Anna Ridgway is with us on museums. Dorcas Roberts, who I believe is elsewhere, is in preservation of and in charge of all of our buildings, and her buildings team and her horticultural team. And then we have Kelly Way, Bill, of course, and some good volunteers. Jordan Smith is joining us from development as well at the back. So I think
I would have to add also our maintenance crew and landscaping crews as well. I think the maintenance crew are going to be back in time for the photo, but not yet. But yesterday we were busy throwing chairs in here, and then the landscaping crew have been working incredibly hard to make our properties shine as well. So they're all part of the team too. But thank you all.
thank you, Bill, and the staff. So if I can just talk briefly about the program, just to give you an overview now of what's going to happen for the essentially through lunch. We're going to have Peter Frith come up and briefly explain this building and the World Heritage Center here and its role within the World Heritage Site of St. George's. We're then going to go outside for a group photo, and Queen Quet certainly help us. We're going to keep the sun coming at least until and through the photo. After that, we're going to walk. It's a very short walk down the street to Tempest Restaurant, which is almost in the heart of the old town. After lunch, from Tempest, we're going to be split up into groups and go on a walking tour, as has been mentioned. And at the conclusion of the walking tour, we're all going to wind up back here for our plenary session and our leadership panel. And then we're going to leave from here to go to Government House. His Excellency the Governor was in his jacket and tie. He was certainly probably going to be in his jacket and tie to welcome us this evening, but he well understands and accepted the fact that we're in working dress and will be busy all day running around the town here and in session. And so he's quite happy to receive us as we are. We can pretty ourselves up as much as possible, but he does understand that not everybody is going to go all the way back to Southampton to to get formally attired like one would normally perhaps do in going to the Governor's mansion. So there we are.
And if I could add one final thing to that, after the photograph is taken, if Lana, Dame Fiona, I feel very proud doing this, Queen Quet, Princess Dana, and Mrs. Catherine Leonard could all come back up. We're going to do a little bit of an interview with one of the local media. And then we'll join for lunch.
No free lunch for you lot. You all have to work for your lunch. There you go. Okay, Peter, come on up from the World Heritage Centre and the St. George's Foundation.